Have you ever looked at your phone contacts and realized you don't feel like calling anyone anymore? That's what happened to Harold Bennett, age 79, on an October evening, as the maple leaves outside had nearly all fallen, and the wind whispered through the old window panes. He sat in his lakeside wooden cabin, flipping through an address book that was once thick, now sparsely filled with names. Some had passed away. Others, he no longer had a reason to call. He wasn't sad, but he didn't feel joyful either. Strangely, he wasn't lonely, but he didn't feel like seeing anyone. Something inside him had shifted, and he didn't know if that change was right or wrong. But he knew, deep down, that one door had closed and another, quieter, deeper one, was gently opening. On a quiet weekend evening, his granddaughter, Sophie, a 27-year-old nurse, came by. She poured some tea and sat beside him. "You used to have a lot of friends, didn't you, Grandpa? Why don't I ever see anyone calling or hear you calling anyone?" Harold didn't answer. He stood up, opened a desk drawer, and pulled out an old address book once packed. Now barely containing a few names he wasn't even sure were still alive. Many he had quietly crossed out, not out of resentment, just because there was no longer a reason to keep them. That night, after Sophie left, Harold sat alone under the warm yellow light, typing a message to his old friend George, then erased it. He didn't know how to start. He wasn't sure if the other person still cared to listen, and honestly, he didn't know if he had anything left to say. A few days later, he made an effort attending a senior group meeting at his old church. Familiar yet distant faces. Polite small talk. "How have you been? Still living at the lake house? Got grandkids yet?" Harold smiled politely, stayed 30 minutes, then quietly left. On the way home, he stopped by the bakery, but didn't see anyone worth buying an extra pie for. Back home, he sat on his porch rocker, watching the sunset turn the lake red, and sighed. "It's not that I dislike people," he thought. "It's just, I don't feel the need to pretend anymore." That evening, Harold opened an old drawer where he kept letters Eleanor had written him for their anniversaries. One letter was from his 50th birthday. A sentence inside made his chest tighten. "You don't need to hold on to anyone as long as you can hold on to yourself. It's enough," he cried. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time in years something had touched him deeply. Her words captured something he'd never been able to articulate. He wasn't cold, he was just protecting the fragile peace this life had taught him to treasure. From that day on, he stopped forcing things. He didn't text. He stopped replying to invitations he knew were purely out of politeness. Instead, he rose early, brewed tea, wrote in his journal, and listened to the birds each morning. Sophie still came by every Sunday, no longer pushing him to go out or asking too many questions. They just sat together, sometimes reading, sometimes silent. Yet both felt something gently blooming, quietly, peacefully. Harold began living in tune with his inner rhythm, not to please anyone, not to maintain social ties, but simply to return to himself. He thought he had found a rhythm that fit: calm mornings, afternoons reading by the window, quiet Sundays with Sophie. He no longer felt the need to talk much, meet many, or hold on to anyone. At times, he believed this was it, that he'd reached the final chapter of his journey. But life had one more lesson to send. Not through crisis, but through a simple phone call. A voice familiar, yet distant. A tiny crack, seemingly trivial, but enough to shake his heart. It was an early winter afternoon. Wind rattled the roof. Harold was journaling when the phone rang. The caller was Daniel, his son, now living in Boston. Daniel's voice wasn't angry, but heavy. "Dad, I don't understand. We call and you don't answer. We invite you to visit the kids and you decline. Since Mom passed, it's like you've disappeared." Harold was silent. Daniel continued, this time with a hint of pain. "I know you want peace and quiet, but sometimes it feels like you're pushing us away. Do you even still want to stay connected with us?" That question cut deeper than any accusation. The call ended quietly, and for the first time in months, Harold didn't feel peace inside his home. In the following days, he was more silent than usual. Sophie noticed but didn't ask. He didn't write, didn't read, just sat for hours on the porch, watching the lake freeze over. He began to doubt the path he had chosen. Have I been too harsh? Have I withdrawn so much that I've hurt those who love me? Am I really different from those who once abandoned me? The stillness he once loved now felt heavy. No longer a refuge, it felt like a sealed room, trapping him with his own doubts. One snowy evening, Sophie came by with hot soup. Seeing him sitting in the dark, she quietly placed the bowl on the table and left a note. On it, she wrote, "You are not alone. Not because I'm here, but because you're still with yourself. But if you ever forget that, I'll sit with you until you remember." He read it, folded it up, didn't say anything. But for the first time in days, he poured a second cup of tea for two. The next morning, Harold picked out a card. Not an email, not a call, but handwritten the way he once wrote to Eleanor. He wrote to Daniel, "I'm not avoiding you. I'm just learning to listen to myself again. But maybe I've been so quiet, those who need me can't hear me anymore. I don't want to be loved out of duty, but out of connection. And I know, if that connection still lives, it will transcend even silence." He enclosed an old photo, Daniel as a child, sitting on Eleanor's lap, while Harold looked at them smiling. No words, no caption, but full of meaning. In the days that followed, Harold didn't expect a reply, but he felt lighter, because this time he wasn't hiding, wasn't clinging, wasn't pushing anyone away. He was simply accepting the shift within, without letting it erase what truly mattered. He no longer sought anyone out, but he no longer shut people out either. He learned to let people in if they needed him, and to let himself go when silence felt right. One morning in midwinter, Harold sat on the porch, steam rising from his tea. Snowflakes drifted down onto the frozen lake. No one called. No one came. But this time, he didn't feel empty. He smiled, remembering something Eleanor once said. "Peace isn't when people are near. It's when you no longer feel the absence of anything, even when you're alone." If someone asked him now, "Why do you live like this?" he might say, "Because I've lived with many people and finally learned how to live deeply with myself." And if one day you find yourself stepping away from the crowd, are you running away or coming home? That stillness, is it loneliness or a sign that you're finally hearing the deepest voice inside your heart? Harold's story isn't rare. In fact, many people after 60 or 70 experience something similar. They stop calling, stop meeting, and slowly choose to be alone. But that doesn't mean they're cold or closed off. On the contrary, they're tuning into a very real, very deep shift within. Here are 6 common psychological reasons many older adults gradually withdraw from relationships, not because they don't need others, but because they've started to truly understand themselves. And they realize not every connection is necessary. Not every silence is loneliness. AG1. It's not that you're closed off. You've just been hurt before. Something strange happens the longer you live. Trust becomes precious. You no longer open your heart as easily as before. Not because you're cold, but because your heart has been broken too many times. Maybe you used to be the kind of person who welcomed everyone in. One invitation and you were there. One phone call and you'd listen to the end. You believed that if you were kind and genuine enough, every connection could be preserved. But time is not always gentle. People you trusted quietly disappeared. Loved ones said things that hurt you without even realizing it. And then it all passed. No apologies, no explanations. Only you left holding on to the small things that somehow left the deepest aches. Harold Bennett was once that kind of person. He used to be the glue, the one who called, who hosted, who brought people together around a warm dinner table. But as the years passed, the calls stopped. Friends either passed away or drifted off after a curt goodbye. One day, he typed a message to an old friend named George and deleted it. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't sure if opening his heart still meant anything anymore. Some part of him had chosen to step back. And then, you change too. You stop initiating conversations. You decline invitations you used to get excited about. You start choosing quiet not because you're afraid of getting hurt again, but because you don't want your heart to grow weary one more time. You begin learning to protect your peace, even if it means fewer people walk into your life. But somehow, that feels enough. Because you understand, some wounds don't need to be spoken aloud, only gently held in your heart as you learn to live more tenderly with yourself. 2. You're not lonely. You're just choosing peace. Sometimes, people think you're pulling away, but the truth is, you're coming closer to yourself. You're not angry at anyone. You're not bitter. You just find it harder and harder to stay interested in shallow conversations, surface-level check-ins, or noisy gatherings where no one really listens to each other. When you were younger, you used to push through just to keep the peace. You smiled politely at empty small talk. But as you age, you begin to see clearly. Sometimes, silence is worth more than a room full of words. Harold Bennett tried to return to social life. After months of solitude, he agreed to attend a retirement group meeting at the old church, where he used to know so many warm faces and familiar voices. But after just 30 minutes, he quietly left. He didn't say a word, just stepped out into the windless afternoon. Because he realized, no one did anything wrong. No one lacked kindness. But everything had changed. The conversations had lost their depth. The laughter didn't feel real. And he found more meaning in the quiet moments on his porch than in that crowded room. Maybe you felt the same. You go quiet at the party. You avoid long phone calls that lack genuine connection. You choose to sit beside a warm cup of tea instead of showing up just to show up. And over time, you realize you're not lonely. You're just choosing peace. And you don't need to apologize for that. When no one really listens anymore, silence becomes your true companion. Maybe you still have a lot to say, but you don't say it anymore. Not because there's nothing to share, but because you've grown used to the feeling of speaking and not being truly heard. You've shared a memory, and the person across from you just smiled and changed the subject to market prices. You've opened up about health concerns and were told to just stay positive. You've confided something personal and were called too sensitive. So over time, you spoke less. You closed your journal. You turned off your phone earlier. You sat quietly, alone, not out of anger, but because silence felt safer. Harold Bennett knew that feeling. When his son Daniel called from Boston and said, "Dad, it feels like you're pushing us away," Harold didn't argue, didn't respond, because he knew what was happening inside him. His son might not understand, not because Daniel didn't love him, but because 2 generations no longer spoke the same emotional language. That silence wasn't a retreat. It was Harold's way of protecting the truth inside him from being misunderstood one more time. Maybe you've been there too. You speak and someone says, "You're rambling." You share a memory and they give a polite chuckle. You express a fear and they change the topic. And so, you turn inward. You sit with your thoughts. You journal instead of talk. You ask yourself questions and answer them in your own time. Because in the end, you discover silence isn't as frightening as it once was. It keeps your secrets. It never cuts you off. And it listens with an open space so vast, no one ever interrupts. 4. Refusing help not because you're strong, but because you don't want to be a burden. At some point in life, you begin to turn down offers of help. Not because you can do everything on your own, but because you're afraid of becoming a burden. You used to be strong, the pillar of your family, the one everyone turned to when things got tough. You got used to helping others, but never quite learned how to ask for help yourself. And now, as age slows you down, there are moments You wish for support, but you hesitate. Even asking for a ride to the doctor feels like too much. You weigh the idea over and over and then say nothing. Not because you don't need it, but because you don't want to be the reason someone has to shift their schedule, worry more, or feel exhausted. Harold Bennett understood that deeply. During a phone call with his son Daniel, when offered to move in for easier care, he gently declined. He said, "Son, I don't want you to rearrange your life for me. You have work, your kids, and everything running just fine. I'm here alone, yes, but I'm okay." Behind those words was a quiet truth many older adults keep hidden. It's not that they don't want companionship. They simply value the freedom of others more than their own comfort. Maybe you felt the same. You were about to call your child for help fixing the light, but didn't. You wanted someone to go to a doctor's appointment with at no, but told yourself, "It's fine, I'll go slowly." You wished someone could stay for dinner, but didn't ask, afraid they'd feel awkward or busy. So you quietly pulled back, handled it yourself. Not out of pride, but out of a quiet need to protect your dignity and to make sure your love never feels like an obligation. You're not weak. You're just living with a silent kind of love. One that fears burdening others because you truly care. When 5, no one did anything wrong, you're just drifting from old relationships. Some friendships don't end in fights. They don't break because of conflict. They simply fade like a sunset slipping quietly into the horizon. You once had a circle. Colleagues, book club friends, old classmates who called every holiday. Conversations that lasted for hours. Laughter that came for no reason. But life moves. People relocate. People marry, raise children, get busy with responsibilities. No one did anything wrong. It's just that the things that once brought you close no longer exist. Harold had an address book like that. Thick, colorful, filled with names marked in his neat handwriting. That evening, when his granddaughter Sophie asked why no one called anymore, Harold opened that book. He flipped through each page and saw names crossed out. Not out of anger, not from disappointment, just because there was no reason to hold on anymore. Some had passed away. Some drifted after Eleanor's funeral. Some once close friends simply disappeared, and no one noticed exactly when. And Harold accepted it as part of life's natural rhythm. Maybe you've been there too. That old friend you wouldn't know what to say if they called today. That neighbor once so close now just passes you at the grocery store. You don't blame them. You just realize sometimes distance doesn't need a reason. It just happens. And you understand. Not every relationship needs to be saved. Sometimes, letting go is how we preserve the last bit of kindness between two people who once meant a lot. 26. Being alone isn't emptiness. It's a new kind of freedom. There are mornings when you wake up in a house with just you. No voices, no one asking what you need. And yet, your heart feels calm, like you're not missing anything at all. When you were young, being alone was something to fear. You thought, if no one is around, if no one calls your name, if no one checks in, that must mean loneliness. But with time, after truly living with yourself, you begin to see loneliness and stillness are not the same. Harold walked a long road to understand that. After turning down his son's offer to move in, after choppy calls and misunderstood conversations, he stopped waiting for someone to show up. Instead, every morning, he rose early, made hot tea, and sat alone on the porch. Autumn leaves floated down slowly. Sunlight streamed softly through the branches. No one called, no one visited. But he smiled, a complete, contented smile. He wasn't missing anything. Maybe you felt that too. Alone in the kitchen, alone in your bedroom. But if peace fills your chest, then you're not lonely. You're free. Free from needing to please anyone. Free from answering small talk questions. Free from bending yourself to fit into a world that no longer matches your rhythm. free to live on your own terms, free to be quiet and hear your heart clearly. And in that clarity, you begin to understand, as Harold did. I lived with so many people just to finally learn how to live deeply with myself. Harold Bennett's story isn't rare. It reflects millions of lives. Maybe yours, maybe someone you love, or maybe a part of you, the part slowly choosing silence over noise. Harold didn't shut anyone out. He didn't reject love. He simply stepped back to give himself a space that was quiet, honest, and true. And it's in that stillness that we begin to see more clearly why, as we age, we withdraw, why we don't open up as easily. Because of every wound we've carried, because of everyone we've lost, because of every time we weren't heard, because of every meeting that drained more than it gave. These 6 reasons are not excuses. They are reminders that when an older person pulls away, it's not weakness. It's a kind of mindful, conscious maturity. Dear friend, if you've ever felt like Harold, typed a message, then deleted it, held your phone, then set it down, stood in a room full of people, and still felt empty, please don't be hard on yourself. You're not wrong for choosing quiet. You're not heartless for feeling tired of small talk. And you're not strange for stepping away from familiar circles. You're simply listening to the shift happening inside you. A very natural transformation from someone who's lived enough, felt enough, and now just wants to live truthfully. Truth doesn't need a crowd. Truth doesn't need noise. Truth only needs your full presence with yourself. If you're in that chapter, please know, you are not alone. There are millions like you, learning to listen inward, finding peace in stillness. And sometimes, all it takes is a quiet morning, a warm cup of tea, and a row of trees standing still, to realize, I don't need the whole world beside me. I just need peace in each breath I take. Thank you for listening. If this video brought you peace, if it made you feel seen, if it reminded you that you're not alone, leave us a message. We read every word, the way you've just listened to every feeling within you. See you again in the next quiet moment we share.